Tēnā koutou no rangatira o Tauranga Moana, ka nui te mihi ki koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to the Wastewater Management Review Committee, Wednesday the 29th of May. Just want to first of all say that please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed on all around the world on YouTube. So, and it will be publicly available after the meeting as well. So just a reminder to members, please speak into your microphones clearly and only one speaker at a time for clarity. And also please turn off your mobile phones or just switch them to silent. That would be most appreciated, thank you. I will welcome everyone shortly in the chairperson's report, but in the meantime, can we just have a karakia, please? Thank you. Kia ora, thank you, Mātari. Just calling for apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Steve Morris and also Councillor Max Mason. And I believe, have we got a message yet from Carlton whether he's going to be late? Or? Okay, so we will just leave that one at this point. So, mover, Councillor Rick Kurak, seconded by Whitty. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. There's no public forum, so as far as the chairperson's report goes, I just want to welcome a few people here today. First of all, just want to welcome Erina. Erina, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on board this committee. We acknowledge the wonderful work that Tama did on behalf particularly of Ngā Pōtiki, and I'm sure that you're going to be a very able replacement and looking forward to your contribution. And there is a letter here which just confirms that Erina is the representative for Ngā Pōtiki on the committee, and that's a tabled item. Just wondering, do we have to receive that tabled item? It has been received, so thank you. Just confirm. So welcome, Erina, and look forward to your input. Also, just want to welcome first of all Joe. Joe here is our new committee assistant, committee advisor. Just get the term right. So this is your first time, so welcome, Joe. And also want to welcome Louis Dupree. Louis, welcome, Louis. You are the new wastewater treatment manager, and so again we look forward to your contribution. Thank you for your efforts to date. That concludes the chairperson's report. Acceptance of late items. We have late presentations. Okay, presentations are not counted as late items. Any other late items? There being none. Any change to the order of business? I don't believe there is. So we'll get on to confirmation of the minutes. And we've got two sets of minutes, the 19th of December 2018 and the 28th of February 2018. So before we ask if there is any items for discussion on that, I'd like to call for a mover and a seconder to receive those. Thank you, Whitty. Move. Oh, sorry.
I can only confirm the 28th of Feb.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Look, is there anyone that was in both meetings? Mātari, you were there. Well done. So moved by Mātari, seconded by Councillor Kurak. So before I put the motion, are there any comments or items for follow-up? Okay, there are none, so I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of conflicts of interest? No. So moving on to business of the day. And we're going to start off with DC 141, wastewater activity update, and presenting here is Radley. and Wally. So thank you very much, guys.
Thanks a lot. So this is our wastewater activities update, where I'm just going to run through a number of projects that are currently underway, and some of the monitoring that we've done over the summer and the reports that have come out of that, just to give you all an update. So I'll run through the issues that we're having with the UV plant, the newly built thickening and dewatering plant, the final effluent pipeline upgrade that's about to commence, the odour survey at the end of last year, and as I said, the monitoring that's been undertaken over the last 6 months or so. And I'll just finish with a little bit on how that regional wastewater overflow management group's going. So we'll start off with the UV plant. As you'll know, we've been offline since just prior to Christmas, and that was due to a major electrical fault that basically fried the electrics of most of the UV lamps. And we've been trying to, staff have been working with contractors over the last 6 months to look at different options around how we might get the plant up and running again. The fixes that we've done over the previous few months prior to this latest fault have although they have worked for a period of time, we keep coming up against the same problems. So we've been looking at new ways we might be able to fix the UV plant so that we can keep it running on a more consistent basis. And the way we've sort of come to look at this is that the control system itself is one of the major problems that we have, and staff and contractors have been working on a simpler control system that we can use that will allow us to not only run the plant more consistently, but it will also give us some redundancy in terms of being able to run a number of lamps rather than all of the lamps or none of the lamps. So that's the way that we're looking to go, and that new control system will take us 2 to 3 months to create and then to put in place and make sure it's working the way we need it to. Obviously, over the 6 months, we can't stop discharging, and although we haven't had the UV plant running, we have the discharge has still been going through the rest of the plant, so the wetlands and the ponds. So it is getting some UV treatment through that, a natural process, and we've been meeting our conditions of the consent in terms of those discharges over that period of time.
Can we take questions sort of section by section?
Yeah, sure.
So that's the end of the UV plant. So just a question. If I remember rightly, is there 16 bulbs or tubes or whatever
I think it's 18.
18. So have you worked out what the ideal number is that need to be operating to be effective?
So the initial trials were just whether we could run single and double lamps on their own. So we haven't gone all the way up to running the full 18 or a dozen or 6, but that'll be part of the commissioning process of the new control system, so that we can optimise how many we can leave as a redundancy and how many we actually need to make sure we're still meeting what we need to with the plant.
Thank you. Any other questions on the UV plant? Elena?
Yes, just a question around, obviously it hasn't been operating since late December, and you've been getting the natural UV through the ponds and the wetlands over the summer period. As we move into this winter period, and although it is tauranga, less sunshine hours, what potential impact will that have on the outflow or discharge?
So historically, although we may have slightly less sunnier weather, we've also got colder temperatures, which will also help reduce the bacterial loads. So it actually sort of evens out to a certain extent, and you'll find that we'll still be able to meet those consent conditions.
Thank you, Radley. So can you give us an indication on when the UV plant will be up and running at full capacity?
I might defer to Wally here, but I'll just say that there's some commercial legality stuff that has to be worked through in terms of the system that we've currently got, and we're still working through those legal things. The actual commissioning of the system, the new system, will take 2 to 3 months. I believe those two things are going to be able to be done concurrently. So ideally we would have something in place within the next 3 months.
Yeah, with us meeting the consent conditions, does that mean to say that maybe we could lower the thresholds once we get it up and going, the UV, you know, because if we're meeting the conditions now without the new thing coming on, to a layman like me, that says that maybe we could lower the thresholds even further.
So I suppose as a consent holder, we'd like to have the ability to, when we have maintenance issues like this, to be able to continue to meet the conditions. But I get your point around being able to lower that when the UV plant's running. That's something that the regional council would come to a decision around. I'm guessing at the review stages or at a time of a new consent.
And so that means I've lost my train of thought, sorry.
Thank you, Radley. Next topic, thanks.
Next we've got the thickening and dewatering plant. The plant was finished around early April and commissioning is underway. Since early April, no sludge has been going to Pond 1 and it's been going through the plant. I believe it's around 290 tonnes a week that's being taken off site currently. The flows from into the plant have been increased while we've been relining the Memorial Park to Chapel Street old pipe. So we have been getting a larger amount of sludge than we would normally get. And when those relining works are finished, which should be in the next 2 weeks or so, that flow will reduce and so the amount of sludge will come down slightly. And we'll also be able to improve the efficiency of the screw presses as we get somewhere near what would be normal flow levels. My understanding is the plant's working well, and we've been sort of refining how we load out the sludge. But other than that, there's been no issues with that commissioning so far.
Thank you. Quick question. The sludge that we then take off over to Hamilton, it goes to Hampton Downs, is that right? Do they have a special facility receiving that sludge as opposed to the general kind of landfill?
My understanding is it's used as fill in the landfill, so it's used to fill up the cracks, as it were. And there were some issues last month when they had a fire at Hampton Downs, so the amount that they were able to take was reduced, I believe, and that's also impacted the transfer stations. But that's been resolved now. And
Any other questions on that? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Probably just a question around the transporting of sludge to Waikato. Any reason why it has to go off-site from? I think just to put it a bit more, is that we've always, tangata whenua, I've always had this issue around, having waste transported to other tribal areas, and that hasn't been resolved, and so that's why I still ask that question.
at the moment, we don't have facility for storage of that amount of sludge.
If I remember rightly, we were looking at beneficial use of the sludge, and that was like another phase, if I remember rightly, of our development. So where are we with those other options? I believe we had some options we were looking at.
Yes, through Mr. Chair, that's right, and we're still looking for beneficial reuse of the biosolids. It still has to be further processed. So some of the things that we're looking at the moment, we're re-engaging again with vermicomposting market. you may recall that there were some restrictions in that market, the amount that, they couldn't handle the volumes, and if they did take it, there was not a ready market for vermicompost that had human waste in it. So there was a requirement for us to buy back that product, even though it had been processed elsewhere. The other thing, we're still considering a solar dryer, and in the meantime we're hauling biosolids over the Kaimais to Hampton Downs as an interim measure until we come up with a long-term strategy for biosolids. At the moment there is not a ready market for biosolids amended products to go back on the land. We certainly agree with your comments, Marty, around beneficial reuse. We think it's a tragedy that real valuable resource, that carbon, is not being returned to the land and where it can have beneficial use. But at the moment the market doesn't support that.
Thank you. Is it the market or is it the legislation that we're currently working under?
The legislation does provide for it through the RMA. You just need a consent to do that. But there are real constraints around who will take food or crops or even pasture. There's restrictions on what that pasture can be used for, around, especially for dairy. It's possible, it's achievable. It's just that a lot of people in the market are taking a very wary approach to having biosolids amended products put on their pasture or on their land. We think, in this area, kiwi fruit would cry out for it. The kiwi fruit grow, up in the air. They've got no contact with the product put on the ground. We think that would be ideal, but the market is not there yet.
Yeah, with the educational and advertising program going on about the wet wipes, would that be a way forward to get it out there, like marketing it to the public and all of that? I'm just thinking aloud here.
Certainly, yeah.
I mean, these issues are, all around New Zealand and indeed all around the world. So I think it's a case of working a process of opening up dialogue and discussion with other parties, and surely there must be some sort of solution, even if it's, for example, looking at kiwi fruit, whether or not the ability for us to liaise with the likes of Zespri or the growers, it'd be worth just finding out what discussions might be beneficial. So I can't be more specific than that, but yeah. If the market isn't really wanting at the moment, it just might need a little bit, re-education or assurance. So can we just note that in the minutes? Thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay, so the next project is our final effluent pipeline upgrade. And this is the pipeline that goes from the Tamanga plant and transports the water from the plant to Pond 2 prior to entering into the wetlands. So HEB were awarded the contract, and that project is about to start. The project is aimed to be finished around August, maybe September. But there is a temporary bypass that should be operational sort of the end of July, beginning of August, and that will speed up the process with the water being over pumped to Pond 2 from the plant. So it's just a temporary bypass while the upgraded pipe goes in. So I have another picture which just shows you where the pipeline will go. So it'll come down Tip Lane, round Pond 1 and have that discharge point into Pond 2.
So just clarifying, it only goes into Pond 2, but there was an arrow.
There is a
point.
Yeah. So the other one does show you there is a pipe that will go to Pond 1, and that's for when we have a peak flow events. So that we need that capacity.
At the moment, the flow between Pond 1 and Pond 2 is split about 90-10. So 90% of it goes to pond 2 and 10% of the flow roughly to pond 1. We still want fresh, because there's still some sludge in pond 1, so this keeps fresh water on top of it to keep it aerobic, stops odours coming through and that sort of thing. So we'll still be using pond 1 and both ponds for flow balancing and having the treated effluent going through both ponds.
Towards the end of 2018, we undertook a 2-yearly survey with the local community around potential odours from the 2 treatment plants. So the red areas are zones that we have a survey that we ask, and the red zones are potentially impacted areas that are close to the treatment plants, and then the green areas are our control sites that should have similar odour issues outside of the treatment plants. So for example, the Matua area would have similar odour issues potentially around things like sea lettuce in the summer, but won't have the impact of the Chapel Street plant. So we can compare the surveys from those 2 areas and get an idea of whether the treatment plants are having an impact. Both areas had some levels of at least annoyed, which is the sort of guideline that the MFE guidelines use, but these were well below the 20% required to basically equal that there's a significant impact on the community. So the only real recommendation that came out of the report was that we should increase the sample sizes just to get the error margin down slightly. So at the moment we probably contact around 70 to 80, or we get 70 to 80 replies to the survey in those areas, and we're going to make sure that we boost it up to around 100 just to get that margin of error down. But the actual results were fairly insignificant in terms of any impacts from the community, on the community, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just in terms of the report itself around the odour, there was quite a lot of other, in terms of people's, I don't know, conjecture about where odours were coming from, etc. Was there anything of interest in amongst all of the other?
So the obviously Tamanga probably is the one where we get the most others, and that's not surprising, seeing as we have the transfer stations, the composting, also private waste facilities in the area, and it is essentially still quite close to an industrial area as well. So depending on the wind, you do get a number of different odours in the area, and it is hard for people to ascertain where they might be coming from at times as well, and we've certainly seen that over the summer period, where we've actually, unfortunately, it was after this survey was undertaken, but there have been a number of we've been working with the regional council about a number of odour complaints in the area, mainly from other sites, not the plant itself.
Is there any other way of, assessing the odour and the source of the odour in terms of some scientific or technology, as opposed to this very, what would you say, very
Subjective.
much subjective approach to trying to figure it out?
There are various things you can do. For example, both the plants have annual measurements taken at surveys as well, that look for sulfides and odour causing chemicals, as do the other sites in the area. It is difficult. It's very subjective, and what we've found is, even with having people on site at the right time, it's still subjective and difficult to pinpoint where these are coming from, and the regional council are having the same issues as us.
Yeah, just jumping on it in this Waka there, maybe it could be part of the technological review. I'm trying to find something more technical that can detect the odour, I suppose.
Yeah, I assume with, modern technology, there should be some sensor sort of technology that may be able to be used, so it'd be worth investigating that, so good idea. Mātari?
Yes, kia ora, thank you again, Radley. I think that it would be a bit difficult in terms of the Tamanga area because you've got all sorts of different smells coming from the transfer station, and then you've got the composting as well as the ponds area. So, yeah, how that would be managed, I'm not sure.
That's just reminding me that I know Louis has invested some money in getting a new weather station put in at Tamanga, which will help us to identify where the wind's coming from actually on site, which should help us at least be able to say that it's unlikely to be coming from the plant or wherever when we do get these calls come in from the public.
Yeah, I just had a technical question on the survey itself. In terms of phone numbers, do they use mobile numbers or only landline numbers?
At the moment, it's just landlines, but we can look into.
Can you please look into that for future? Because as most of us know, the prevalence of landlines sort of are reducing compared to mobile. So that would be helpful just to discuss that with the research company. Thank you. Thanks, Radley.
So as you're aware, we've got a consent for the seepages that come from the oxidation ponds, and on a quarterly basis we've been monitoring these for the last two years or so. On a quarterly basis, it was previously annual before that. When we commenced the desludging of Pond 1 in November, we changed that to monthly monitoring to give us a better indication of the impact the desludging may have had on those seepages. And we did see a spike in November, December during that monitoring. We worked really closely with the contractor on site to check that their methodology was minimising those seepages as much as we could. And what we found is when the desludging finished in March, that those seepages did decrease quite significantly straight after that. So if I put up the next slide, this is just a graph of the seepages in green, and the red line is the pond levels at the time, and the grey is the amount of sludge that we were desludging at the time. So you can see in 2016, 15-16, when we did our desludging there, we had a spike which initially caused us to increase the monitoring, and you can see at the end of the graph where we've increased that monitoring to monthly, and we've seen that same spike as we've gone through the desludging process. But what we've also had is much higher pond volumes during that time as well. So you can see the red line, we made a concerted effort to reduce the pond volumes over the summer to help with that those seepages, and they have made some impact in that last month to 6 weeks prior to the desludging finishing. So that should have been, sorry, I did have an updated one with March and May's volumes, seepages as well, but basically that green line comes down for March and then comes down again for May, so we're on the downward curve of the seepages, and they've been reducing steadily. We're back to quarterly monitoring now.
Radley, just to, and probably for Erin's benefit, just to clarify my understanding, when the sludge is sort of scooped out, that there has been like disturbance on the bottom of the pond, which obviously leads to the seepages. But my understanding is we've worked with a contractor to minimise the depth of the scooping. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So we raised the level that the contractors were sucking the sludge from to try and keep it off the bottom of the pond. And we also restricted the area of the pond that they were able to desludge, so we kept away that the half that's closest to the harbour. We said don't go in there. So really they've been desludging from the landward side of the pond, and we raised the level they were sucking from to reduce the impact as much as we could.
So what happens to the sludge that's on the harbour side of the pond? Does it just stay there, or do we at some stage have to desludge that part of the pond?
So as part of the decommissioning of the pond, we're letting the sludge that's currently in the pond mature for another 12 months or so, and then we'll do a final desludging, and that will include the whole pond.
Thank you, Radley. I just have one question. It might be a reader error in terms of looking at some of these tables. Just table 3 around the W6 water quality results, and it looks like there is a very large spike of bad bugs, for a technical term, in March 19, and then that's where the table finishes. It's greater than 10,000 in terms of E. coli and greater than 10,000 in terms of coliform. It's page 14 of that report around the
Page 75 of the...
44 of the agenda.
I can look into that for you. I can't give you whether that's shall we say a transcription error, or whether that's a real figure. I'll find out for you and get back to you about it.
Yeah, just because of the timing,
Yeah.
I think, of that one, does that mean that potentially we should be considering ongoing monitoring, particularly at that seepage point, rather than just quarterly?
I'll also look into because we've had May monitoring after that as well, so we'll have another one. So I'll look at both of those and I'll get back to you about that.
Thank you.
Can you please just like reissue that table with the May results and just send it around to all of us? So that's well spotted, Erin. Thank you.
The annual report itself generally only includes up to it goes from February to February, but I've extended it to include the whole of the desludging, but I'll make sure that we include May as well. So in February we also do shellfish monitoring, and this is done at a number of sites along the edge of the oxidation ponds, and we also have a control group which you can see there on the right hand side. And although we saw an increase in abundance at the control site, the numbers were still, there was no significant difference in distribution or maturity between the control sites and the seepage sites. And Titiko were observed grazing in close proximity to the seepage activity, I believe W6 and W6A. There was nothing really nothing out of the ordinary, and in line with historical data. The groundwater showed similar levels to the historical results that we've had previously. We do have a new upgradient bore. Sorry, I thought I had a slide in there with the new bore sites. But basically, the new bore site is at the end of Tip Lane by Truman Lane. And that's allowing us to get something that an upgradient bore that hasn't the potential impact of the landfill site, where historically the upgradient bore has been between the landfill site and the oxidation ponds. So as I said, results have been consistent with historical trends, and we are seeing slightly higher ammonia and phosphorus readings in the down gradient bores, and we're also seeing some salinity impacting on some of those bores, which we would expect given the closeness of them to the harbour.
Sorry, just to clarify then, the bore itself, the water that comes from that, what specific, do we just put that into our plant? Is that, or what's the actual purpose of the bore?
So the idea is that we monitor any potential impact of the oxidation ponds on groundwater. So we flush the bores out prior to testing. Yeah, it's a monitoring tool. And although we do see that slightly elevated levels of ammonium and phosphorus, that's been consistent and it isn't increasing over time, as far as we can tell. In summer, we also do a number of receiving environment sampling, whether that be offshore water samples or intertidal shellfish or even shellfish that are actually resting on the outfall pipe itself. These are tested for a number of different things, whether it be heavy metals, E. coli, and all of these samples have come back well within the consent conditions. And lastly, I just wanted to give you an update on the regional group, which is the 7 TAs, so from Bay of Plenty, has been led by the regional council, and we're looking at putting together a best practice guideline for dry and wet weather overflows, how we respond to them, how we report on them, how we manage them. This has been ongoing work for a number of years. It's sort of dropped off the radar for a while, but I think we've had 3 meetings now, and we've got another meeting tomorrow, which will be giving us a bit of a desktop analysis of where we're currently at in terms of our current processes and plans as a combined group, and where we might go in terms of what else is out there which might be a better way of doing things, or where we need to improve in terms of what we've currently got. We hope to be able to bring a draft guideline to the committee before the end of the year, or well, because of what's happening, it will be beginning of next year now. But yeah, so we should have a draft by the end of the year at least. That's the plan.
I'll be interested in your early indications as to how our practice is compared to sort of other territorial authorities and even international best practice.
So early indications are that TCC has a good process, but there are definitely areas that we can improve on. In terms of regional, we're probably certainly ahead above most of the rest of the region. But in terms of nationally, there's probably some work that we can definitely improve on.
I know this may have been asked before, but is there any chance that a tangata whenua group or grouping could be involved with this group? Because I know it's only the regional council and the rest of the TAs around the bay.
So one of the things the group is currently talking about is how we involve tangata whenua into this process, and whether we do it as a region or whether each council comes back with a more high-level best practice guideline to then involve local iwi in, so that we can be more specific in terms of the requirements that iwi might have, rather than going too wide.
I just want to say kia ora, Carlton. Thank you for joining us. That's fine. Thank you. So is that the end of your report on that section? Thank you.
That is it.
Thank you very much, Radley. Are there any other questions? Thank you. We have a recommendation on page 22 to receive the report, DC 141. Can I have a mover for that, please? Thank you, Marjorie. Seconded by Erana. Any discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you, and thank you, Radley and Wally. Now, DC 140, and this is the Wastewater Monitoring, Upgrade and Technology Review, which happens, I understand, every 5 years. Did I get that right? Yeah. So we've got a presentation here. So
So I'll just introduce, we've got representatives from Becker and Boffa-Miskel here today. Every 5 years, the council are required to commission a monitoring, upgrade and technology report, and the committee can make recommendations around the appointment of the independent consultant. Today I've asked Becker and Boffa-Miskel to come and present to you about how they might approach leading the preparation of this report if they're appointed. Becker staff's recommendation based on their experience and their ability and what they bring to the table in terms of their national and international experience and the work that they've previously done. Another benefit of us bringing a recommendation to the committee is that with the timelines that we have in terms of the meetings that the committee have for the rest of the year and into next year, this by Becker bringing this recommendation, it sort of enables us to potentially have a draft of the report for the next committee meeting, and it then allows us the time to for the cultural report. That's another requirement of this to be done over the remaining period of the year and into next year. And what that allows is for the cultural report to have a real idea of what that technical report's going to include, and then we can come back in the new year and incorporate the cultural report and any recommendations that might come into the final draft before it goes to the regional council. So I'll introduce Gary McDonald and Christina Hermans and their team that they've put together, and let them enthrall you.
Thank you. Welcome, Gary, and welcome to the rest of the team. Appreciate your assistance in this matter.
Kia ora katoa. Thank you for the invitation from the committee to present to you. We understand that you have received our proposal which we submitted to council a few weeks ago, and the purpose of our visit today is for you to get to know a bit more about the experts we've assembled to undertake various parts of that review, and they'll each be talking, introduce themselves, talking about their expertise and what they will be covering. I'm first cab off the rank. My name's Gary McDonald. I'm a technical director with Becker. My background is from the South Island. I was background Central Otago on the shores of Lake Hawea and overlooked by Mount Aspiring. So I'm very much was a mainlander, and about 1993 I was shifted to Auckland for a couple of years of reorientation, and I'm still there. Very strong connections with the Bay of Plenty, and it's Meg and I've already decided where we're going to retire. The team you have is drawn from two consultancies. It's you'll see the name CH2M Becker. That's actually a joint venture that Becker has with a large international consultancy, and our tradition has been that we always we try and partner with overseas companies to bring technologies that perhaps New Zealand has not yet developed ourselves, to learn from their successes but also learn from their mistakes. So CH2M has been a partner of ours for 22 years, and they will provide whatever expertise we ask of them. However, Becker is a very strong New Zealand company, 3,500 of us in a professional engineering and management consultancy across Asia Pacific. In New Zealand and Australia, we have a strong team, probably one of the largest water and wastewater teams of 150 of us, and of those, 20 reside and work in the Waikato Bay of Plenty area. Becker is a very passionate Tauranga-based company. We're one of the largest services companies in the region, and we're a strong city partner for many, many years. We're chosen to work on this one with Sharon DeLuca, who will speak herself, from Boffa-Miskel. They are environmental consultants with another large practice in New Zealand, and also a Tauranga office. So well-resourced locally, but supported by national experts and international expertise as we require. You'll see from one of the advantages we hope we bring is that we do have experience right across the country. So the map that is on the slide, and which we include in the proposal, shows those many cities and communities where we've been actively involved in wastewater management, wastewater treatment, wastewater disposal, In other words, the whole gamut of how we're dealing with the wastes that come from our cities and from our industries. So that expertise, which John Crawford will talk a little bit about, enables us to give multiple lenses on what is possible across the country, across the world, but also in particular how the practices in Tauranga are being used and followed, and what more could be done, what improvements could be made, and that's part of the review, is to make sure that we do put the net wide so that we can actually improve what is currently in place. There is quite a prescriptive outline in the consent as to what the review should cover, and we intend to follow that, but there are also some other factors that I'll talk about later when I come in towards the end. But I'd like to turn the microphone over to Garrett, and he will talk about the compliance and progress towards monitoring. He'll be followed by Sharon, who'll talk about environmental ecological monitoring, then by John, who will talk about some of the technologies, and then by Christina, who is our project manager and stakeholder engagement manager.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Garrett Hall. I'm a water quality scientist by training. I have almost 20 years experience. I'm relatively new to Becca. I've been with Becca for about a year. Prior to that, I worked for Stantec or MWH for 10 years. MWH did the consent in 2006 for the discharge. I wasn't involved in that process, but I know some of the background. Prior to that, I worked in the UK, and I originally started my career in Northland Regional Council as an enforcement officer. I come from the North Shore of Auckland, and I still live in Auckland. I do a lot of work around New Zealand, more recently in Auckland itself, but a large amount of my work is in the wastewater space, and more recently in the Waikato region. In terms of targets, compliance, legislative updates, just on the left-hand side of the screen there, we've got an image from the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan for Tauranga. The consent condition specifically talks about TCC's progress towards achieving zero waste. Obviously a key part of that in terms of wastewater processes is biosolids management, and you were talking about that earlier. In terms of guidelines, New Zealand has some quite enabling guidelines from 2003 which have been recently updated. There's a draft 2017 guideline. So the legislation, the legislative framework is there. It's the perception issues, as Radley and Wally were talking about. We can provide some national context on that. There's some good examples in New Zealand where beneficial reuse is occurring, but unfortunately they're very few and far between. On the right hand side there, that's just a shot of the enterococci bacteria and consent compliance. We're going to review the consent compliance over the last 5 years. I'll provide an independent view on that. I haven't been involved in this discharge consent at all in the past, so I'll provide some independence to that. And then also there's a requirement to look at regional and national legislative updates. We've obviously got the Regional Coastal Environment Plan operative in 2018, but also some movement at the national level as well in the freshwater space. Not so relevant here, but there's some movement in the coastal space. Also be reviewing the environmental monitoring. We were talking earlier about the seepages, some of those trends and changes in that, also the groundwater monitoring locations. And again, I'll provide an independent review of that monitoring over the last 5 years. And it's not only the trends in it, but also recommendations around the scope. Is it appropriate? Is it appropriate to continue with this monitoring in the future as well? So that's my aspects. I'll just hand over to Sharon DeLuca, who'll talk about marine ecology.
Thank you, Garrett, and welcome, Sharon.
Kia ora tātou katoa, ko Sharon toku ingoa, ko Mangatautari toku monga, ko Rapurapu toku awa, ko Tiro toku papukainga. I tipu o ki reira, I nai ine ko Toranga Moana toku kainga. Me toku wahi mahi no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, I'm Sharon DeLuca. I'm a marine ecologist based here in Tauranga. I work for Boffamisco and manage our local office here. I grew up in the Waikato, but consider Tauranga to be my home, having lived here for the past 15 years. As part of my PhD, I tested the effects of various contaminants on shellfish physiology and analysed the presence of fecal indicator bacteria in shellfish, in sediments, and that was in harbours throughout Auckland and Whangarei, looking at the effects of septic tank leachate on marine ecology. Through my 15 years at Boffamisco, I've developed significant experience in monitoring and assessing the effects of various discharges on marine ecology, including wastewater. I've worked on a number of projects with Becca over that 15 years and continue to do so. When carrying out assessments of effects on marine ecology, I focus on the independence of my advice and my expertise. I look at the context and review existing data, consider whether the methodology is appropriate, scientifically up to date, and ensure that the data collection is robust and thorough, and ensure that communication of the findings is clear and understandable to all audiences. I'm known for asking the hard questions whilst being solution focused. For TCC in 2014 and in conjunction with Toi Ohomai, we monitored the effect of the current wastewater outfall at Omanu. We looked at the effects on marine ecology. So we looked at intertidal and subtidal benthic invertebrate assemblages, shellfish abundance and size, and we looked at the presence of fecal bacteria in those shellfish. And there was nothing in that data to indicate any adverse effects on marine ecological values. The next wastewater receiving environment survey is due to be carried out in 2024. So to this review, in summary, I bring marine ecological expertise and strong ecological principles. Kia ora, that's my presentation. I'd like
Can I
to hand
just
over.
can I have a question, please, before you hand
Yes.
on? You say this next round of testing isn't required till 2024. So what's your involvement in this process now?
So I'll be reviewing the 2014 survey that we undertook and interpreting that and reviewing that methodology to determine whether it's still appropriate, looking at whether 10-year monitoring is sufficient or whether it should be more frequent, just bringing it up to date.
As part of recommendations and all that, and I'm including this to everybody here, when you make recommendations, let's say in a best case scenario, things are looking good and the technology is getting better, will recommendations include lowering the thresholds that we have to adhere to in the resource consent?
I heard Radley answer that question for you. I suppose I'm not as concerned about what the conditions and what the thresholds say. I'm concerned about what the discharge is and if it is having an effect on the marine ecology. And if any technologies or novel approaches can be undertaken to improve the quality of the discharge, then that's fantastic and all the better for our receiving environment.
It's just that my focus would be trying to lower these thresholds to get to the council's zero waste target, and to me, all of the recommendations should be directed towards that because Tangata Whenura's view is that we want zero waste in there.
Kia ora, Whiti. Radley mentioned that this would be appropriate when the review comes up. What's the timing of that, Radley, if you can give us an indication?
I'll have to check the conditions of the consent. Sorry about that. I'm not 100% sure, but I think the timing of the 5-yearly report to regional council is so that they have it 6 months before their review period, or their ability to review. So that's where the two sort of combine.
Kia ora, thank you. I'll hand over to John now, who will talk about technological advances.
Thank you, Sharon, and welcome, John.
Kia ora tātou katoa. I originate from Mangamuka at the head of the Hokianga Harbour and in the foothills of Mangataniwha. My name is John Crawford. I am a senior principal at Becca, specialising in wastewater treatment. I did my degree at the University of Canterbury, and I've worked in this field now for 33 years. I now call Hamilton my home. I've been there for 24 years after spending a number of years working in both Singapore and England in this same field. I've worked for Becca now for 2 years, 1 week and 3 days. My role here and in my previous role at Opus, I worked with many councils and industries around New Zealand, helping them with upgrading of their wastewater treatment facilities and implementing new facilities. And also I work in many resource consenting processes as well. I've previously worked with both Louis and Wally on jobs in other parts of the country. And one of my jobs in doing those projects is to introduce to clients new technologies that are available and how those technologies might help them with the issues that they're facing on their plants, and they're not obligated in any way to take up those options that are available. They may not be appropriate at the time or affordable at the time, but the job is to put them out there and to discuss them. I have little or no previous background of work on either Te Manga or Chapel Street plants, and so I guess that helps me to bring quite a degree of independence to the work that I'm doing here. My roles on this in this task are twofold. One is to review how TCC is doing in terms of its use of technology and its introduction of new technology, but also to look at what might be considered in the future. And I think what's very helpful in that regard now is that we have 30-year planning horizons for infrastructure, and that is just about or slightly more than the lifespan of a technological option in a plant, which is roughly 25 years. Whereas if you look at it on a purely LTP basis, 10 years is only about half or a third of the span, and you don't get to take that big overview. So I think this current option of 30-year planning horizons is quite good. Okay, now TCC is already well advanced, I believe, in addressing technological choices. If you look at Te Manga, it's currently going through a capacity upgrade. It's introducing thickening and dewatering processes, and the dewatering process, for example, is a very low energy option compared to what was typically used in the past. You have very high efficiency turbo blowers at Te Manga, which are sort of state-of-the-art technology, and also the screening process. And so that's looking good. Chapel Street has been in the process of deciding what is the future of that plant. Is it going to be an energy centre based on sustainability, or is it going to continue in its current modus operandi? And so there are opportunities to look at what might be the best for that site. So looking to that, there's a toilet up there, and the resource consent conditions mentioned looking at waterless systems. I don't think that's quite the issue. The issue is to look at the water cycle on a bigger picture, and what might be our or your opportunities for introduction of partial recycling of effluent to use it as a resource, for example, for irrigation within the city, that reduces demands and stresses on your potable water treatment plants. Looking at the liquid treatment streams, we have to ask, clarifies the long-term future of the plants, or is there a space for membranes or a combination of them? We're talking about disinfection being an issue at the moment, and there are quite rapid advances in the technology for reactor-style UV treatment. Can they be looked at? And it's always good to go back and look at, on a longer-term scale, ozone as an option. It's an extremely good disinfectant, and it has other benefits in a plant. It's still expensive to implement, but it's good to look at it as a potential option. Then looking to the solids. Currently, the practice of trucking it over the hill to Hampton Downs is probably wasteful. And also, as the case here, and as the case in many places in the country, it's not desirable to take your sludge from your rohi and put it into someone else's rohi, just as much as you don't like to take it from them. And so I think there's an opportunity there to look at advances in solids processing technology that will make it a more desirable product that the market is more accepting of. For example, putting in lysis type processes and pasteurization type processes, which people know work in the milk industry and kill bugs. Do they give you an opportunity to make it much more acceptable to the local market? So those are some of the things that we can look at there, and I could go on and start talking about odour, but that's for another day. And so I look forward to the tasks ahead. Thank you.
And Christina is our project manager, and will keep us on task. And that's what she's going to talk to you about now, is the program that hopefully we will be sharing with the committee.
Kia ora tātou. My name is Christina Hermans. Most of you know me, but for those of you who don't, I thought I'd just quickly introduce myself. So I'm an environmental engineer. Been working for the last 20 years in Three Waters infrastructure. I specialise in infrastructure planning and also stakeholder engagement. So a little bit about myself personally. I grew up in Wellington, and I'm of Pacific and Dutch descent. And 12 years ago, our family made the best decision ever, and we moved to the Bay. And I married into the tangatu whānau, who are out at Te Puna. So in terms of, I've been lucky enough to work on some of the largest infrastructure projects in Tauranga, and I suppose one of the things that gets me out of bed in the morning is, I believe that people have a right to have safe and reliable infrastructure services, and also that they have a right to have a say in how those services are delivered as well. So just up there on the board is a proposed timeline, and I'd be interested in your feedback on that. So in terms of the consent conditions, we know that we need to have I call it the MUTA report, have our report to the Regional Council in around March next year. So working backwards, what we're proposing, if we're engaged, is in the next few weeks, is that we could draft up a first cut at the report. So that would be looking at the performance over the last 5 years and an initial discussion on technological advances in August. That would be presented at a workshop in August. And the consent also talks about that a cultural paper could be produced if it was wished by the Wastewater Management Review Committee. And so there's a bit of a hiatus there with elections and things, and that the committee will be reappointed early next year. So we thought between September and December that would be 3 months to prepare a cultural paper. And then, so just to be clear, that wouldn't be us preparing the cultural paper, that would be someone of your choice. And then in February 2020, we're suggesting that that is presented at the workshop too. Then after that workshop, the first 2 workshops, then we would be able to update the report and then present that again to the Wastewater Management Review Committee. And then send it off to the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. So.
Kia ora. The cultural paper, was that done last time? There was a cultural paper done,
Correct.
composed for
Yes,
that?
yes.
So I imagine the expectation would be that would be the case again. That would be my understanding. Would that be correct? Yeah, Marjorie?
Yes, kia ora through you, Mr Chair. I think too is that we will probably need to come together as the tangata whenua to make that decision on whether we're going to commission someone to actually do the cultural paper. The other thing too is that we may need to look back at the historical stuff that we've done in terms of see whether those principles have actually been achieved. So, and moving forward is just trying to also working through some of this timeline as well, whether it's suitable for us, because we also have our own commitments to other things as well. So probably in the near future, some stage, we'll probably gather ourselves together to put something towards you in terms of trying to fit into this whole
Kia ora.
project.
Thank you, Marjorie. We'll make sure that's reflected in the minutes, and I think it's important that that process gets underway as soon as practical for you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Christine.
Thank you, Calvin. I'd just like to hand over to Gary now. Gary's going to talk to us about some of the other factors that we'd like to include in the report.
We think it's timely that after 15 years of the current consent, the climate, if you like, or the context in which those conditions were written was probably not as cognizant of some of the things that really are shaping our world and our industry now that were back in 2005. So I think the opportunity that we're proposing is to touch on some of the influences that, as we look forward for the remainder of the consent, that need to be taken into account. Now, this is not going to be a huge exercise in options analysis or study. It's really just saying where is the current system as it's currently operating and as it's planned. What are the vulnerabilities, or what are some of the areas and influences that ought to be taken into account in the planning process? So I think we're all conscious of the sustainability of the globe as an entity is certainly a challenge, and the UN itself has adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals, number 6 of which is water, so very relevant to us all. And the context that we see in that as well is the resilience of these systems, because water in itself is an entity, but in actual fact it's delivered through infrastructure, so it's the resilience of the infrastructure and the treatment plants that really are at the core of that. And riding on the back of resilience is that of climate change, both the extreme wet weather events that we are subject to in New Zealand. I know that the Bay is sometimes hit by some of these cyclones, and we do get flooding, but by the same token, we can still need to think about long-term periods of no rainfall, not necessarily the droughts like Australia has, but what would happen if we had a long period where some of our water sources were put at risk, and that's where the reuse that or recycling that John was talking about may become relevant. So there's an opportunity to look at, well, what are the challenges, but what are the opportunities that climate change brings to us? Clearly, in a city that's fringed by the ocean on one side and by the harbour on almost every other side, sea level rise and those extreme high tide events are something we need to be conscious of, particularly with Chapel Street and Tamanga being right on the water's edge, if you like, and we need to protect those assets from inundation, from salt water, because salt water and treatment processes don't mix very well. But also the network. So there's an implication of that long-term sea level rise as well as any short-term implications. And lastly, every country is zeroing in, if you like, on zero carbon. New Zealand itself has now got a bill before Parliament and is most likely to pass. And there will be obligations on all of the communities, all of the councils, to actually look at opportunities for reducing our emissions. Now, I'm conscious that Tauranga is currently right at this moment looking at the 2 treatment plants, looking at the sort of emissions associated with those plants, how they might be reduced, how the energy use might be reduced, or the biogas produced at Chapel Street, for example, as John referred to, could be increased so that we're reducing our need for electricity or gas off the grid. So those are, I know they all seem to be quite risky, but they are opportunities as well. And what we'll do in the report is just just flag those areas that are touched on by each of these other factors. The last one was, once again, I think there is a worldwide swing in our particular industry, and I'm conscious of it, and so is John, that for a long time, many years, we've called it wastewater, but in actual fact, there are resources in that waste, not the least of which is water. And so there are opportunities, accelerating opportunities to look at the recovery of energy, of phosphorus, of biosolids, and of bioenergy from the wastewater which we currently flush away. So we won't do, as I said, a full investigation of those. We'll flag those so that council come forward as recommendations. Here is an opportunity to look at these, and I know that already Wally and his team are looking at these, have identified some of these, and are funding studies into, well, what could council do with the resource that they currently have at the two treatment plants. So that was really just an overview of some of the factors that we're going to bring to bear in terms of our review of the current practice and what might happen in the future. So you've heard from our 4 or 5 experts, and I hope that you'll take the opportunity, maybe if there is time, Mr. Chair, to question us on particular aspects of the review. The reason we've assembled the team we have is that we felt, given the time frame that Christina has set in front of you, we need to have people on the team that are thoroughly cognizant of what's happening at the moment. So that's, and we're party to the last review. So Christina, Sharon and myself were part of the last review. So we bring that knowledge forward, and we can look at those recommendations that were made back then. But we also wanted the independence of 2 new people, which is, and you've heard John and Garrett say that neither of them are actively involved in the Tauranga scene. So we feel that the team is both a mixture of I won't say age, but experience and independence. And we can challenge each other as we go through. So hence the composition of the team, and we hope that we'll meet your requirements and look forward to hopefully working with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary, and I have to say it's an impressive team that you've assembled together. A good diverse range of experience, which I'm sure will be beneficial to us all. Are there any questions from the Carlton? Kia ora.
I don't know if I've got any questions. I've got plenty of statements. I've got a really philosophical one too, and that's about us as iwi on this committee. And we don't, our drive isn't a New Zealand guideline or a standard. The infrastructure is the least of our worries, and a normal monitoring regime doesn't interest us. We're interested in being different, and we are completely different in our philosophy around how the impacts of the plants and how they operate, what guidelines. So we want to challenge all the guidelines. The New Zealand international standards we don't agree with. So we're not happy that they always meet those guidelines and everything's okay. That's not how we see it. So just so you know, the team knows that's how we operate and how we've always operated. We challenge everything on this committee, all the reports, all of the reviews. And because we come from a different culture, with different philosophy, and a different environmental understanding. And if I go to some stuff that Sharon talked about was well, the end result of the monitoring around the outfall pipeline having no effect on the environment, which, I mean, to be blatantly honest, that cannot be true. But because we use those guidelines and those levels in that monitoring, and we only monitor for a certain amount of impacts, that's the end result of your report. Are we monitoring pharmaceuticals, which is an international issue? And so I'm glad you've raised those other issues that are possibly things to look into, because that's what's concerning Indigenous people around the world with wastewater. And they are things that I'm personally interested in looking into, not just doing the norm all the time. And what I said about pharmaceuticals, I mean, it's on the international UN radar now, but the latest reports are absolutely alarming. And that that through our wastewater scheme. It's something we don't monitor. And so monitoring E. coli only is not good enough if you're actually being serious about the impacts on the environment and on us. E. coli is not the only thing that comes out that outfall pipe. There's heavy metals, there's pharmaceuticals, there's a whole, which are devastating to the environment. If you're not going to monitor them, well, you're only going to get one answer, that it's having no impact. So, just broadening maybe the team's thing around what the responses you'll hear from us on the committee around monitoring and that. We will always voice our opinion on the results, and we challenge it. We're not meaning to discredit anybody, but we've got an end goal in sight, and it's about that cumulative effect. We've got 2 outfall pipes at the end of one short coastline, either end of one short coastline, and a giant sinkhole in the middle called the entrance. And those 2 outfall pipes, absolutely, and Sharon knows this through her expertise around sea lettuce and stuff, that they actually have an effect on the inner harbour, not just a 50, 60, 70 metre stretch of sand at Papamoa. Their contribution and nutrient overloading and then being sucked into this harbour on the incoming tide. Things like that is how this brain operates, especially around the cumulative effect, because it's something that the government has challenged MFE and everyone else involved to start looking, the RMAs, to start concentrating on the cumulative effect of these things. So it's something I think we need to be looking at, because we've been charged with that. In New Zealand guidelines, we've challenged a lot of the industry players around here on just sticking to the New Zealand guidelines, and we have been successful in changing the limits, breach limits, down to well below the New Zealand guidelines and standards with a lot of the industry players and their discharges into the harbour. So that's also something we'll raise all the time. Why do we stick to limits we're unhappy with?
Kia ora, Carlton. I'm sure that message is getting through loud and clear, but any response initially?
Kia ora, Carlton. I just had a couple of comments there. I agree with your sentiment on emerging contaminants, and I agree with your comments around cumulative effects, and that will definitely form part of my involvement in this review, so thank you for those. And just one really minor point of clarification. I didn't say that the survey that was done on the subtitle and intertidal assemblages had no effect on the environment or showed no effect on the environment. I said that it had no effect on the marine ecology. But I agree that the environment's far wider than marine ecology. Kia ora.
I value Carlton's inputs, because I think that there is a trend, and we need to be very cognizant of those trends, and if that requires a heightened or different level of monitoring, then that's probably why these reports are done every 5 years, to allow those inputs to be taken account of.
Thank you, Gary. I noticed that you are referencing Manukau and Christchurch plants. Is that like a baseline sort of comparison? We're using them as a model?
I need to give you an example of the different types of plants that are effectively. We've worked on the Manukau, of course, is discharging to a harbour, so a little bit analogous to Chapel Street before it was transferred to Tauranga, but clearly, the harbour environment is important, and that was why the level of treatment at Mangere has been increased substantially. And that the Christchurch plant previously is discharging to the estuary, now discharges to an ocean outfall. So it really is just sort of looking at those 2 plants and saying that the receiving environments are important, and we always work backwards from those receiving environments. I mean, it's tempting to work down the pipe, but in actual fact, it's where stuff ends up that we need to come back up the pipe. So that was the reason for referencing those.
Thank you very much, Gary. Are there any other questions from the committee? So we have a recommendation on page 90 to receive... Oh, sorry, thank you.
My question is around the TCC procurement policy and how it fits in terms of this committee, particularly that there's only 2 elected members here, effectively awarding a contract or making a decision to appoint consultants to undertake this work. So the question is, how does this fit with the current TCC procurement policy within its criteria? First, if you can answer that.
Thank you, Councillor Couric. That's a very salient question.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. It's within our General Manager's discretion, so he has got the delegated authority to issue a contract of this value direct to a consultant or a service provider.
Thank you, Wally. So why is it coming to a committee to approve? Why isn't it just done internally? This is very unusual for me. As a council, we do get contracts which are direct procurement, where it hasn't gone to the market, where we do make decisions. But given there is delegated authority, why are you here asking us to approve that, please?
Thanks for that question. So the requirement of the consent is that the committee has input into whoever is appointed. It's very important that one of the functions of the committee is to have that input and are able to question and make recommendations to whoever that independent consultant is. So in that respect, it's slightly different than.
So given that, would you be comfortable if it's amended, say B, so the heading the Wastewater Management Review Committee support, not appoint. So we don't make the appointment, so we support CH2M Becker. Would that be okay?
That's a very good point, and yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. On that basis, I'm happy to move.
So thank you, Councillor Couric, moving that with the word appoint replaced by the word support. Do we have a seconder for that? Thank you, Marjorie. Any discussion? Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Congratulations, team. Looks like you've got a job to do. So we look forward to hearing back from you in due course, and clearly there's quite a reasonable time frame for this to happen, and we'll be working closely with you all the step of the way. So thank you. Okay, we're on to our final business item for the day, DC 142, which is the Environmental Mitigation and Enhancement Fund update. And again, Radley, will you be taking us through this? Thank you.
Sorry, Joe, would you be just able to put the my initial presentation back up? I've got a couple of slides just at the end of it. So this is really just to bring back to the committee where we're at in terms of drafting of those EMEF guidelines for the fund. Back in the end of last year, we had our initial workshop. Well, if I go back to June, we had a workshop with the entire committee where we discussed a way forward in terms of getting a new set of guidelines for administering the fund. And at that workshop, it was decided that the Tangata Whenua members of the committee would get together to see how that might be progressed for the particular actions that they were looking to improve in terms of those guidelines. So we've had 2 workshops so far, and Carlo has been working with the group to put together a draft set of guidelines. So as I say, 2 workshops so far, and the draft was put through as part of the agenda. We have another workshop set up for a couple of weeks' time, where we hope to make some further progress. But it was really to bring the current draft to the committee so that you could see the progress that's being made, and whether there was any comments or recommendations prior to the next workshop. As I say, the draft is a combination really of the original guidelines, the 2017 draft that was put together by, I think it was put together by Bofa Miskell, and obviously the input from the committee members at those workshops.
Thank you, Radley. Any specific questions or comments? Erina?
Sorry, Radley, I'm just slightly confused in terms of, on page 122, the reference to next steps doesn't refer to the guidelines, but it refers to the cultural and environmental monitoring plan, which is, I assume, the document that was produced by Bothamiscal as the key reference document. So I'm a little bit confused.
Okay, yeah, apologies, that's probably my fault. Yes, we will be obviously reviewing and completing the draft guidelines. The draft guidelines themselves, as they currently stand, indicate that CEMP will be quite a key reference document for those guidelines going forward. So that's where I've not quite made that clear. So I think hopefully I've sent you a copy of that.
Thank you, Radley. I have to say I'm very grateful to Carlo for facilitating those workshops, and I believe he's done a very good job. And thank you for members of the committee who have been very involved in reviewing these guidelines. And it has taken a little while, but it looks like we are making progress. Is there any specific feedback that the committee would like to give at this point, or do we feel like we're on the right track?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I suppose for me, this is going to be the first workshop, the one in a couple of weeks. So I think it'll be interesting, perhaps having a slightly different perspective around the table to contribute to that work.
Thank you very much. So what I suggest is we receive the report. There's no specific feedback provided right now, but clearly there will be opportunity in the next workshop. So if it's all right with the committee, we might just drop B at this point, and we'll receive the report. So I'm happy to move that, seconded by Fitty. Any discussion? Thank you. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, everybody, for conducting the business of the day in such a good spirit. There's no late items, so I will now call for a mover and seconder to go into public excluded. So thank you, Carlton. Moved, thank you. And seconded by Martiri. Thank you. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.